Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of Living Wisdom. I'm Christine alongside Deb, and we are talking about something really important. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the feelings associated with getting this dementia diagnosis. But the big question is, how do I help my loved one, right? It's great that I'm going through these feelings, but now you have someone who does have this diagnosis. And from what I'm seeing in comments, a lot of people saying, I don't even know where to start. So where do you start?
So one of the primary emotions that comes with a diagnosis of dementia that impacts this whole topic is people feel helpless and hopeless. Okay, they feel like there's nothing I can do to fix this. Although you want to fix it, it's not humanly possible to stop it or change it. And so that leaves us all feeling kind of like we're just hanging out there. And you want to help, you want to do something. We all by nature want to be helpful to a loved one. And so you kind of go, as you said, what do I do now? Where do I begin? So my recommendation to people is always to know where you're starting the journey. So it's really important once you have that diagnosis that you get some kind of evaluation, assessment, testing to help you as a caregiver and other family and friends to know and understand where on this journey is your loved one. Oftentimes people will go, why is that important to know? Well, it's important to know because as people move down this road and through this journey, what their needs are at particular times will change and will kind of need to be adapted in terms of how you're relating to that person or how you're caring for that person. So it's very helpful as a loved one and caregiver is to understand where is my mom right now, and that will help people help you to understand what does she need at this point in time in the journey and what can you do to help provide support and care in the best way for that person where they're at on the journey. People think dementia is dementia, period. And that it's the same all along. Well, that's not accurate. Needs and how people process information, how they're able to relate, what their perception of reality is, all those things will change as they progress through the journey. So it's really important that initially you have some kind of evaluation or assessment that helps you know where is my loved one starting at this point, and what does that mean for you as a family and as a caregiver? What can you do that's going to be the best, the most therapeutic thing right now that you can do?
So would you go to like a specialist for that, or what does that look like, and what are some sorts of things they do during this test? Is it like a brain scan? Do they ask you questions, or what takes place?
So there's a difference between testing that is diagnostic and testing that just looks at level of function or progression of the disease process. So for diagnostic testing, typically that's going to be done by a neuropsychologist, a neurologist, might be your family physician who does some testing and diagnosing. I always tell people to make sure that you've gotten a thorough evaluation and testing process to know that that diagnosis is an accurate one. Sometimes people who do not specialize in neurological disorders of the brain or things like dementia, such as just a standard family practitioner, will just do some simple questions in their office, ask everybody who's over the age of 80, what day is it, what year is it, what, that kind of thing, and give a very simplistic kind of off-the-cuff diagnosis of, oh yeah, it's probably dementia.
Not helpful, by the way.
Not
helpful.
Not helpful necessarily. Could be accurate, but may not be. The problem with that kind of thing, without CAT scans and blood testing and other pieces of medical diagnostic process, is that there are lots of other things that can be reversible medical conditions that can create the symptoms that look like dementia.
Gotcha.
But if you treat the condition, the symptoms go away. So it's not truly progressive dementia. So things like B12 deficiencies, any kind of acute medical condition, infection, flu, urinary tract infections, electrolyte imbalances. So there's lots of other things that could potentially look like what we think looks like dementia. But until somebody is very thoroughly tested, you don't really know what it is you're actually dealing with.
Makes sense, yeah. And so obviously, can you get those recommendations from your family care physician on where to go?
Correct.
Or easy to kind of figure out?
Typically, what a family physician will do or should do is that if they see those simple signs that they're asking those questions about or testing for in their office that might indicate potential dementia, hopefully then they're going to give a referral to a whole series of lab work to be done, potentially an MRI or CAT scan, hopefully a referral to a neurologist's office or a neuropsychiatrist who specializes in the testing to determine dementia and what type of dementia you might be dealing with, which is also important.
Yeah.
Not all dementia necessarily looks the same or has the same disease course in terms of how it presents itself.
Let's talk a little bit about stages, because it's beginning, middle, and end. But that is so vague. So it's like, what does that even mean? So can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. So people will ask, why is it important if I know if my loved one's in early stage, middle stage, or late stage? Well, again, going back to what I had referenced earlier, each one of those pieces of the journey has different challenges, different characteristics. So it's important for you as a loved one, family, friends, to know and understand, because my loved one is in early stage dementia, this is what they're going to need. This is what we're going to see in our loved one. This is how things are going to present themselves. It'll help you know this is normal for where they're at in the disease process. And again, that changes at each one of those areas. Now, oftentimes people will tell me that they get a stage or a number that somebody gives them about where their loved one's at in the disease process. And it's like, okay, why do I need to know if my mom's a 4 or a 7? Okay. Typically, those numbers are based on a kind of this universal scale of dementia that we call the global deterioration scale. And what that does through that level of function testing that we were just talking about, it assigns an approximate number somewhere between 1 and 7, depending on how advanced the symptomology is that we're seeing with the individual who's been diagnosed. Okay. So what I'm talking about is not diagnostic. This is something that would be done after the person already has received a diagnosis. It's to determine, okay, where in that dementia journey is this individual person? Typically, the first 3 to 4 stages of the dementia scale is what we consider very early disease. Oftentimes people will hear it referred to as MCI, or what they call mild cognitive impairment. It's typically somewhere in stage 4 of those 7 stages that a person can get a diagnosis. That's because typically stage 4 is when there's enough overt symptomology that someone else notices something's wrong. And that's typically when people will start seeking physician intervention and testing and help to go, what's going on with mom? Those 3 stages before that, the person is still able to compensate, cover. People can actually have the dementia process present and working on the brain sometimes up to 5-7 years before there's enough overt symptomology that somebody else goes, something's not right here.
Wow, okay.
And so typically it's that stage 4 area when people start to get tested and seek diagnosis. And then that's kind of what we call the early confusional, early dementia piece. And then people will transition into that middle or what we call moderate dementia stage. So that stage 5, early half of stage 6 is what we consider middle or moderate dementia.
Okay.
And then that middle of stage 6 through stage 7 is kind of the later, more advanced dementia process. And so, again, the only reason those numbers have any significance for an individual as a caregiver is if you have a professional who's able to do that testing and assessing and then interpret for you, what does it mean if my mom's a 4?
Right.
What does it mean if my dad's a 7?
Right.
Okay, because otherwise it's just a number. If somebody can't help you understand, the reason you need to know is he's a 4 is because when people are in this stage of the journey, this is how it's going to present itself. This is how they're going to understand and interpret their world. This is how you can best support them or direct them through this process. That's what's helpful, not the number.
Right.
What's helpful is when you help me understand what does that mean.
Right.
It's the same process when we talk about early, middle, or late disease. That specific number isn't important. What's important is that you know if my loved one's in early dementia, what does that look like? What does that mean? If they're in middle, what does that mean? What do they need? That's what's important about that assessment process.
It seems like that's so important, which kind of transitions directly into what I wanted to talk to next was, do I care for my loved one at home, or is it time to find another place for them to get that help? So it does seem like, obviously you know the diagnosis, but knowing where they are on that scale can really help you make that hard decision of, can we do this? Or do we need a little bit of help? So
and typically what we see is most people are able to remain at home and be cared for at home adequately, safely, sufficiently, with a good level of wellness and quality of life. Until there comes a time in the journey when safety and well-being starts to be a concern. Typically, that's when we start to see those issues that surface in that early stage 4 area of the disease process. When what occurs at that stage is oftentimes people don't any longer understand the risks they put themselves at.
Right.
So their safety awareness starts to fail. Also in that kind of early area of early dementia, people don't realize what their deficits or limits are.
Yep.
So lots of times they think they're capable of something, they think they have good judgment, and they don't understand, if I do this, how I put myself or someone else at risk.
Gotcha.
And so that's typically when we start to see things happen in the home environment where people start to be concerned. And unless they have a full-time live-in caregiver who has the ability to manage all of that, that's typically when people start seeking help or support and saying, maybe we need some additional help, maybe we can't manage this in our current environment. And that's a really difficult place to get to, because that's when you start to understand there may be needs for your loved one that go beyond what you can provide at home. And that's a really hard reality to embrace. Because we all want everyone to be able to stay at home as long as possible. And sometimes it's just not safe or therapeutic to do that. So it's really kind of evaluating the whole scenario. And I'm excited because in our upcoming next few episodes, we're going to focus specifically on each one of those areas of early, middle to moderate, and then more advanced dementia, and what do each of those journeys in
Yep.
that time and frame of the disease process look like.
Yep.
And what can you as a caregiver do that's most therapeutic and appropriate to support that person and care for that person in that area of the journey.
Yeah, I was going to say, wait, okay, so if it's early, how do I get the house set up? What are things I should be doing with them? And I was like, hold on, we're going to dive into that. But that really I didn't even know about the number system. And I think that really does help individuals understand, because I feel like so many times too, you may be scared to ask the questions when you're in the doctor's office, or maybe you're not getting the explanation you need. And so that really lays it all out. Is there anything else that you think of that we need to talk about in this portion?
So one of the other things I would just encourage caregivers to do, and we're going to do an episode specifically on, as a caregiver, what are the things that I should make sure I have in place? What are the things I need to do to help myself make this an easier process for me, an easier process for my loved one? But one of the things I really want to encourage caregivers to do right away is to start taking notes about any questions you have, any things that you're seeing in your loved one. Sometimes physicians don't really know what your needs are in terms of information or understanding or questions that you might have. Sometimes when we're sitting in the middle of the doctor's office and we're dealing with all this clinical information that people are giving us, in that moment it's really hard to know, oh my gosh, I should have remembered to ask this, or I should have said, can you tell me more about this? So it really is important to get yourself what I call a medical journal and just start documenting, writing down every time you think of a question that you need more information about. Jot it down in that journal. Take that journal with you to every medical appointment you have. And you know, sometimes physicians are in and out in a hurry and don't really spend a lot of time going, so are there any other questions? So you have to take the initiative. You have to advocate for yourself and for your loved one in terms of what are the things you need to know about. And if you don't get that information that you need from your medical professional, then reach out to myself, one of those other agencies, and let somebody help you find your way to the information you need to have.
It's so important to get you that information, take the time. So much great insight, suggestions, much more to come. As always, if you have any questions, comment below. We'd love to hear from you. And,
Absolutely.
And we can always do a whole segment on it, or we can address it in the next one. And we just appreciate you guys being here.
Yep. Thanks.